Good evening and welcome to another class on the prophets from the Bible. This is a class on um, the book of Samuel. And we are studying chapter 3, probably chapter 3, 4, and 5 today. We began noting that, that Samuel is going to be very different from the book of Judges. And we ended the book of Judges in a very negative way, very tragic way, a lot of bloodshed and also civil war. And as a result, the Bible says that everyone was basically doing whatever they wanted. And this was a place where, a time where there was somewhat anarchy, and the children of Israel were kind of fighting and had no anchor to watch over them, to guide them. So the beginning of the book of Samuel tells us that there is going to be a savior. I say that word a little strong, but this prophet is the one who's going to save the nation. He's going to save the 12 tribes by uniting them and by making them work together. And we're going to see what happens when he does this and what the response is of the tribes as a result of his successful guidance. We noted that it started with an amazing story that his mother, Hannah, sacrifices him to the temple. And that's exactly what happens. When he's born, he's sacrificed to the temple. And that's where our third chapter opens up. Anar Shmuel Misharetet Hashem Lifnei Eli. Young Samuel is in the service of the Lord under Eli. Remember the priest, and we're in Shiloh. Okay, Shiloh is in modern day Samaria. It's between Jerusalem and Carmel. Okay, and Samuel was living there, and he's a servant. He's a misharet. He's supporting. And what he does is the Tanakh tells us that. Second. The Tanakh tells us that that he's serving Eli. But in those days, the word of the Lord was very rare. The translation is rare. It really means yakar, means precious. I mean, precious because it was rare to come by. So it was like finding a jewel. Now this is strange because this is the time of the temple or of the Mishkan. There is a high priest. And you would expect that when there's a temple, the presence of God is felt, and there would be prophecy, there would be the word of God. And yet, there's something wrong. There's something broken in the system, as we discussed in the last chapter. And the thing that's broken is that Eli, who might have been a successful leader, but a local one, for many, many years, he got old, and he was not a very good father. And he let his sons, Hophni and Pinchas, take over, and they were corrupt, and they were immoral, and it left the Mishkan in a very sad state. Now, there's this young Shmuel that's living there, and here is the story of the origin of his revelation, is hearing the voice of God. The story continues in verse 2. Eli was asleep, and he couldn't see. And it also says that the lamp of God had not yet gone out. Now, the lamp of God is a symbol, okay? The lamp of God, if we know that every temple, in the temple there was something called the Ner Tamid, the lamp of God, or the lamp of the eternal light, that was miraculously, it stayed always lit. So here the Navi is telling us that the light, the symbol of that eternity, it's flickering. It's not doing well. It's almost extinguished. And Samuel is sleeping in the temple where the Ark of God was. What a remarkable situation where you have Samuel sleeping in the actual place near the temple, near the Ark of God. Remember, he's a young child. We don't know how young, but he's a young child. So he's a young child sleeping. And what happened? He hears a voice, verse 4. And it says, Samuel. Who does he think it is? He thinks it's Eli. So he said, I'm coming. He runs to Eli. And he says, I'm here. Did you call me? And Eli says, I didn't call you. Go back to sleep. Verse 6, same thing happens. I'm here. You called me. And Eli says, go back to sleep. Now, Samuel hadn't experienced the voice of God. So if you're a young child and you don't understand that you're hearing the voice of God, you assume that it's someone else in the room. Now, in verse 8, the Lord calls him a third time. And finally, in the third time, Eli understands. Now, you get a sense that Eli should have understood the first time. I mean, who's going to hear the voice of God if not the high priest? And yet, Eli didn't. And that hints to us that he's blind, he's deaf, and more importantly, spiritually, he's a bit lost. And as a result, Samuel doesn't know what's happening. He thinks, he's just hearing Eli call him. Finally, Eli says to Samuel, go lie down. And if you are called again, say, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. It's exactly what happens. Samuel. And Samuel responds, speak, for your servant is listening. What's the first thing that God says to Samuel? Remember, this is the introduction to prophecy, the introduction to the revelation of God. What's he going to tell Samuel? I am the Lord your God. I took you, the Jews out of Egypt. I'm filled with wonders and magic. Nope. The Lord says to Samuel, I'm going to do in Israel such a thing that both ears of anyone who hears about it will tingle. Which means I'm going to do something so terrible that everyone is going to shiver and shudder. In that day, I will fulfill against Eli all that I spoke concerning his house. I declare to him that I sentence his house to endless punishment for the iniquity he knew about, how his sons committed sacrilege at will, and he did not rebuke them. It's interesting that in Judaism, you don't only get punished, certainly if you're the priest, if you're the high priest, if you're a leader, you don't get punished for doing evil. You also get punished for being responsible for people who do evil and you not rebuking them. If Eli cares only for himself and doesn't care for his children and doesn't make sure that they are rebuked and set on the proper course, then God will punish them very harshly, and they will understand that we are responsible for each other. Verse 14, assuredly I swear concerning the house of Eli that the sins of the house of Eli will never be expiated by sacrifice or offering. Now, you have to remember in ancient times that they figured as long as I have a sacrifice, I will get cleansed, I will get expiated, I will be atoned for my sin. It's a very dangerous thing. If you always know that your sacrifice will be accepted, so then basically it's a green light for you to do whatever you want. And that's how Hophni and Pinchas felt. So God says to Eli, understand that no sacrifice or offering will alleviate the suffering that's going to take place as a result of what has been happening here. Samuel lays there until morning. He opens the door of the house, and he was afraid to report what he saw to Eli, because you're telling Eli that there's going to be destruction in your own family. But Eli says, Samuel, what did he say to you? And then he said, keep nothing from me. Thus and more may God do to you if you keep from me a single word of all that he said to you. And then Samuel told him everything. I don't think we should, throw Eli under the bus. I think he was a positive model for many years. He was a spiritual leader. He was a priest who governed and watched over, and then he got tired, and then he lost his way. And therefore, here we see the Eli of old saying to Samuel, don't leave anything. We need to know the truth. And if it's going to hurt, it's going to hurt. If it's going to sting, it's going to sting. But you need to tell me what you heard so that we can plan a course of action. And unfortunately, there is no course because Samuel is going to tell him that there's nothing you can do. So he tells him everything, and he withholds nothing. And then Eli says, once again, and this is called vidui. He says, he is the Lord. He will do what he deems right. You know, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, this notion of vidui, and when someone passes away, we call it tziduk hadin. This is what God has decided, and we must accept it. It's a very, very difficult thing to do, but this is Eli's acceptance of his fate. Samuel grew up, and the Lord was with him. He did not leave any of Samuel's predictions unfulfilled. So we see just in one verse that Samuel continues to rise and continues to create a name for himself, and God is with him. That's the way you create a name. And then it says all of Israel from Dan to Beersheba. Dan is all the way in the north. Beersheba is all the way in the south. This was used in the book of Judges when it talked about fighting against the tribe of Benjamin. That the people of Israel from Dan to Beersheba went and they killed the people from Benjamin, or they had a big civil war where tens and tens of thousands of Jews killed each other. But here it's the opposite. Here, Dan to Beersheba, see the greatness of Samuel, appreciate his unifying force, see his spirit of God, know that Samuel was trustworthy as a prophet of the Lord, and the Lord continues to appear at Shiloh. He reveals himself to Samuel at Shiloh with the word of the Lord. So here's an interesting thing that you have here on the one hand, this amazing revelation story where Samuel is meeting God and developing and growing, but it is embedded in like this tragedy prophecy that's going to take place, the destruction. So the destruction of Eli spawns or paves the way for the creation of Samuel as a leader. It's a very interesting juxtaposition. The next chapter teaches us about the Philistines. This is the battle that is the manifestation of the prophecy where God says, I will destroy the house of Eli. It's a battle with the Philistines. Let's remind ourselves, who are the Philistines? We saw them in the book of Shoftim, specifically in the story of Shimshon, Samson. We don't really know where they came from. It's a big scholarly debate. We know that they existed in Canaan from the year 1200 to around 600 BC, so they get subsumed by the Assyrians. We know they were constantly attacking and constantly trying to grab land. We know where their land was. They were on the southern coast in what is called a Pentapolis, which means the 5 cities of the Philistines: Ashkelon, Ekron, Gat, Gaza, and Ashdod. So these cities exist in Israel today, and if you if you excavate, you will find Philistine archaeology there. In fact, they found 150 graves of non-Jews based on their non-Semitic writings and based on the ceramics. And they found out, they concluded, some scholars, that the Philistines were a seafaring people that came from the Aegean Islands, Aegean culture. Now, I bring this verse of the Ark of God in order to understand what's going to happen in the chapter. Let's just read this verse. It takes place in Bamidbar, in the 10th chapter. Vayihi b'nsoah Aaron vayomer Moshe. By the way, we sing this every Saturday. Vayihi b'nsoah Aaron vayomer Moshe, which means, we generally think it means when the ark is opened. But that's not what it means. It means when the ark was moving, Moshe would say, "Rise up, God, and the enemies will scatter, and they will run away, the people who hate you, from your face." Why? Because the Ark of God, sanctioned by God, would lead the battle into war. The Ark would go into battle. Now, that was in the consciousness of the Israelites. They knew that if need be, the Ark goes into battle. And there's a battle that takes place in a place called Afek, Even HaEzer, in a place called Afek. Now, look, where's Afek? Look, here's Jaffa. Okay, Yaffo today. Here's Beit Dagan. The south of Yaffo are the Philistines. There's the coast, south of Yaffo, and Afek is north, pretty far north, okay? East is Jerusalem, or southeast, but Afek is pretty far north, and further northeast is on this Yarkon River. Further northeast is Shiloh. Okay, the fact that the Philistines come this far north means that they kept encroaching. They wanted to take away more and more of the land of Israel, the land of Canaan. And chapter 4 begins, Vayhi dvar Shmuel l'chol Yisrael. Samuel says to Israel, Israel marched out to engage the Philistines in battle. They encamped near a place called Even Ezer, while the Philistines encamped in Afek. Now, it's possible that the Philistines came north, and therefore Samuel said, you need to go and fight against them. Even though God was preparing this for them to be defeated, but this was their punishment. Samuel knew as well. The Philistines prepared themselves against Israel, and the battle was fought, and Israel was defeated, and 4,000 were killed. That was stage 1 of the battle. Israelites come back, and they say, why did the Lord put us out to be defeated before the Philistines? Maybe we should get the Ark of the Covenant from Shiloh, and he will be present with us and deliver us from the hands of our enemies. So the troops sent men to Shiloh, and Eli's 2 sons are there, Hophni and Pinchas, who were in charge of the Ark of God. And they took it. Now, what's missing? What's missing is they don't seek God, they don't ask God, they don't, we don't know exactly how that interaction went. All we know is Hophni and Pinchas are there, and we know all they care about is money. And they emerge with the Ark of God. Now look what happens in the story. Verse 5. When the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord entered the camp, all Israel burst into a great shout, and the earth started to shake. And then the Philistines heard the noise of the shouting, and they wondered, why is there such a loud shouting in the camp of the Hebrews? And when they learned that the ark of the Lord had come to the camp, the Philistines were frightened, for they said, God has come to this camp. And they cried, woe to us! Nothing like this has ever happened before. Woe to us! Who will save us from the power of this mighty God? He is the same God who struck the Egyptians with every kind of plague in the wilderness. Brace yourselves and be men, O Philistines, or you will become slaves to the Hebrews. What do these verses sound like? It sounds like they're talking about Jews, about Israelites. For throughout the Bible and throughout the stories of the Navi, it's the subjects were the Israelites. And when they were struggling and when they called out to God, and you always felt that it was about the Israelites. And all of a sudden the camera shifts from the Israelites to the Philistines. Because when God is angry at his people, then the sympathy goes in the other direction. And it's as if it's, flipping the whole story on its head. You think the book is about you, the Israelites? Not when you sin. When you sin, the book is about the Philistines. So, with great sympathy, the Bible, the Navi tells us that the Philistines had knowledge of God, had respect, were frightened, they had the fear, they had the history. But nevertheless, in verse 10, they fought and they defeated Israel. And the defeat was so great that 30,000 Israeli soldiers died. And not only that, but the ark of God was captured. And Eli's two sons, Hophni and Pinchas, were killed. Now, a Benjaminite runs from the battlefield to Shiloh the same day. I guess Hophni and Pinchas went into battle, right? They were with the ark. Torn clothes, earth on his head, and Eli is sitting on his seat. His heart is trembling for the ark of God. The man enters the city to spread the news, and when Eli heard of the sound of the outcry, he asked, what is the meaning of this uproar? He rushed over to tell Eli. Now remember, Eli is 98 years old. Okay. The man said to Eli, I just came from the battlefield. I have just fled. What happened, my son? He said, Israel was defeated by the Philistines. That's number one. The troops also suffered a great slaughter. Thousands and tens of thousands died. Number two. Your two sons, Hophni and Pinchas, are dead. Number three. And finally, the ark of God has been captured. When he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backwards off the seat, broke his neck, and died. He had been a chieftain of Israel for 40 years. The rabbis always comment that, once again, this shows that Eli was righteous. He understood what the priorities were. He just wasn't strong enough. Why was he righteous? He recognized the value of God, recognized the value of God's presence amongst the people. He recognized the overarching, most important aspect of this news was the ark. When he heard about his sons, okay, his sons died. When he heard about a terrible battle, okay. But when he heard the ark of God, he fell backwards and he died immediately. There is this sense that Eli had the proper perspective, but lost his way or lost his power or lost his control. And he dies. But then the Navi says, but he was the guardian, the shofet, the judge of Israel for 40 years. His daughter-in-law, the wife of Pinchas, was in the middle of having a child. And when she heard also that the ark of God was captured, she was seized, and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead. She gave birth, but she died at the moment she gave birth. And as she was dying, she said, name the child Ichabod, which means I-kavod. I-kavod means there is no glory. For when the ark is taken, the glory of God depart from Israel. So this is the end of this chapter, chapter 4, where everything's, is destroyed. The Ark of God, who they never in a million years would have imagined that the Ark of God could be captured by the Philistines. Of course, the answer is it was captured by the Philistines because God ordained that the Ark of God would be captured by the Philistines. Nevertheless, it is a frightening moment for the entire nation of Israel. And Shmuel was aware of it from the start. Now, once again, a fascinating story takes place in chapter 5, where the story continues with the ark. In other words, the Israelites that are killed and that are dying, that's less interesting. What's interesting is what happens to the ark. Chapter 5 says the Philistines took the ark and they brought it to Ashdod, one of their main cities. Okay? And they put it in their temple. They worshipped a god called Dagon, and the head of a fish and the body of wood and stone, or whatever it was. And they had so much respect for the Ark of God, that they put the ark inside the temple next to the idol of Dagon. So you can imagine what a remarkable scenario where you have the temple, which normally just has the Dagon, this fish, this idol, and next to it is now the Ark of God. The next morning, they go into the temple, and what do they find? That the Dagon is bowing down. It's like fell off of its ledge, and it's face first in front of the Ark of God. And they returned it. Next morning, same thing happened, and its hands and are cut off, and the only thing that's left is like the face of the Dagon. This was so frightening that the trunk was intact, but nothing else. That is why, to this day, the priests of Dagon, who enter the temple of Dagon, do not tread on this threshold of Dagon in Ashdod. It's telling us, Philistine traditions as a result of this, which once again reminds us that this is supposed to be Israel that's going through this, that's having this experience. But when Israel doesn't deserve it, so the camera switches to the Philistines. Well, the time for, showing the children of Israel a lesson is, that got done. But hey, the Philistines can't really be expected to house the Ark of God. So the hand of the Lord lay heavy upon the Ashdodites, and there was havoc among them, and they all had hemorrhoids. I guess that's like the worst, most embarrassing type of disease, as if to say that God is punishing you in the most the least dignified way. So what did the people of Ashdod do? They realized that this God is too strong for their Dagon god. So what do? They have a meeting, and they said, we can't control, we can't handle this. So they have a whole discussion about it. And they decide to move it. Let's send it to Gat, a different city. So they moved the Ark of God of Israel to Gat. These days, today, there's a lot of, the last 10, 15 years, a lot of archaeological excavation about the city of Gat. It's called Tel El Safi, and they found just the most remarkable things. It's an unbelievable archaeological site. After they moved it, the hand of the Lord came against this city, causing great panic, striking people old and young with hemorrhoids. So they sent it to Ekron, right? It's like God is like, the ark is like a hot potato. It stings whoever is around it. When when the ark came to Ekron, the Ekronites cried out, "Oh no!" They already learned what goes on. So they said, "You're bringing us the ark of God to slay us." So they sent messengers and assembled all the lords of the Philistines. Send the ark of God of Israel away, and let it return to its own place, so it may not slay us. For the panic of death pervaded the whole city. And the men who did not die were stricken with hemorrhoids. The outcry of the city went to heaven. Now, this is unbelievable because the Philistines, who were supposed to be these marauders, these thugs, these attackers who were immoral and who worshipped idolatry, turns out they are more moral or they're more God-fearing than the Israelites were. That's the sad reality of what happens in a post-Judges society in the land of Israel. There's no leader, there's no unifying force. The Philistines seem enlightened. They understand that they need to act in the most mature way, which is return the ark to the Israelites. It's unbelievable. And this is what they do in chapter 6. The ark was in the field of the Philistines for 7 months. And they said, we have to return it, but how do we do that? So they said, okay, here's what we should do, because we keep getting hemorrhoids. So maybe if we make golden hemorrhoids and golden mice and we create a proper wagon for the ark of God, then we will be blessed and not cursed. So perhaps he will lighten the weight of his hand upon you and your gods of your land. Don't harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts. As you know, when he made a mockery of them, they had to let Israel go. Therefore, get a new cart ready and 2 cows that have not with a yoke in them. They just go through like this religious ritual in order to prepare the ark with a proper respect. Once again, we're showing how good the Philistines are when we're supposed to be saying how bad the Philistines are. It's a topsy-turvy chapter or several chapters where it's the opposite from what we'd expect. And that's what happens when you increase corruption and immorality. So where do they send this? They send it up the road to Beit Shemesh. I often, when I did tour guiding, I would go to Tel Beit Shemesh, and I would point to the place where you can imagine the children of Israel working in the land, and they're living in Beit Shemesh, and all of a sudden they look up and they see a wagon with 2 cows or oxen, and on the wagon is the Ark of God, and it's coming back on its own. It's not the most stupendous image of miraculousness that even when there were cows, even when they sin, the Ark of God doesn't belong outside of the borders of the land of Israel. And they come along the path, and the cows went straight ahead. And second. Sorry. And they receive the ark. The cows, they received the ark. And they, verse 15, the Levites took down the ark of the Lord and placed them on the large stone, and the men of Beit Shemesh presented burnt offerings. And the 5 lords of the Philistines saw this and returned the same day to Ekron. And then it goes through about the different gold that they gave away. Unfortunately, the Lord struck at the men of Beit Shemesh because they looked into the ark of the Lord, kind of like Raiders of the Lost Ark. He struck down 70 men among the people, and 50,000 men maybe were afflicted. The people mourned, and he inflicted a great slaughter upon the population. The men of Beit Shemesh asked, "Who can stand in attendance of the Lord? And to whom shall he go?" They sent messengers to Kiryat Yearim, saying, "The Philistines sent us the ark. Come and take it and put it in your keeping." Now the story continues with chapter 7. What happens to the ark in Kiryat Yearim? We will continue that on another class. We will take a break because Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Sukkot are coming up. So we will host more classes in the weeks ahead, but not necessarily next week, as we celebrate Rosh Hashanah and Tzom Gedalia, which is going to be right afterwards on the Tuesday, on the Monday. So I leave you with a cliffhanger. The Ark of God comes back, but if they mistreat the Ark of God, then there's going to be havoc and there's going to be destruction as well. So people have to learn how to handle the Ark of God. In Shiloh, it was there for 369 years. It worked just fine. When you deteriorate and you create an immoral environment, the Ark of God doesn't stay there any longer. Of course, in the Philistine camp, it can't stay, and in the Beit Shemesh, it can't stay. In other words, where is the Ark going to rest? And that's going to be our topic to try to figure out. And Samuel needs to figure out what to do with the Ark of God and what to do to ultimately rebuild the morality, rebuild the unity of the people of Israel in order that they can receive the Ark of God and continue on their ways. Everyone have a Shana Tova, a happy and a healthy new year. And we should really, let's hope that the curses of the years of the pandemic end, and a year that is ahead of us will be one that's filled with blessings and joy. Have a good night.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.